Bruce Lee believed that some of the most dangerous weaknesses do not look like weaknesses at all. They often look like confidence. They look like certainty. They look like strength. And that is exactly why they are so difficult to recognize. Because when most people think about ego, they imagine a loud person who constantly talks about themselves and demands attention from everyone around them. But Bruce Lee saw ego differently. He understood that ego can hide behind success. It can hide behind intelligence. It can hide behind talent. It can even hide behind discipline and achievement. The more a person accomplishes, the easier it becomes to believe they have nothing left to learn. The easier it becomes to stop listening, to stop growing, to stop questioning themselves. And that is the moment ego quietly begins to take control. Bruce Lee once warned that a person who becomes full of themselves leaves no room for improvement, because growth requires space, learning requires humility, and wisdom requires the courage to admit that you do not know everything. The tragedy is that most people never notice when ego starts taking over. They think it is making them stronger, but in reality, it is making them blind. Today, we are going to explore the hidden cost of having a big ego, why Bruce Lee considered it one of the greatest obstacles to mastery, and how letting go of ego can completely transform the way you live, learn, and grow. But before we begin, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? And what time is it in your city right now? Lesson 1. Ego makes you believe you have already arrived. Bruce Lee understood a truth that most people never discover until it is far too late. The greatest obstacle to growth is not failure, weakness, lack of talent, or even lack of opportunity. The greatest obstacle is the moment a person becomes convinced that they have already become everything they need to become. This is where ego quietly enters, not with noise, not with arrogance that everyone can easily see, but with a subtle voice inside the mind that says, "You already know enough. You've already figured it out. You're different from everyone else. You don't need advice. You don't need correction. You don't need to change." And the dangerous thing is that this voice often sounds reasonable. In fact, the more successful a person becomes, the more convincing this voice becomes. A little success turns into confidence. Confidence turns into certainty, and certainty slowly turns into ego. Bruce Lee saw this happen everywhere. He saw talented fighters who stopped improving because they became obsessed with protecting their reputation. He saw skilled students who stopped learning because they became attached to what they already knew. He saw people become prisoners of their own success because they were more interested in appearing knowledgeable than actually becoming wiser. And this problem is not limited to martial arts. It happens in every area of life. A businessman achieves success and begins believing he cannot make mistakes. A leader gains influence and begins believing he no longer needs advice. A student learns a little and starts acting as if they know everything. A person gains a small amount of wisdom and suddenly starts looking down on everyone around them. The ego always wants to reach a point where it can stop learning, because learning requires humility. Learning requires admitting that there is something you do not know. Learning requires accepting that someone else may see something you cannot see. And ego hates that. Ego wants certainty. Ego wants superiority. Ego wants the comfort of believing it has already arrived. But Bruce Lee believed that the moment you stop being a student, you stop growing. Think about that carefully. The world is constantly changing. People are constantly changing. Life is constantly changing. Every day presents lessons that did not exist yesterday. Every challenge contains information you have never encountered before. Every mistake reveals something you could not see previously. So how can anyone honestly say they have arrived? How can anyone claim they have reached the final stage of understanding? Bruce Lee knew they could not. That is why he remained a student throughout his entire life, even after becoming famous, even after becoming respected around the world, Even after proving himself repeatedly, he never allowed success to convince him that growth was finished, because he understood something extraordinary. The moment a cup becomes full, nothing new can enter it, and ego is what fills the cup. It fills it with assumptions, it fills it with pride, it fills it with certainty, it fills it with self-importance, and when the cup is full, wisdom has nowhere to go. This is why some people stop growing long before they stop living. Their bodies continue moving through life, but their minds become frozen. They stop questioning, they stop exploring, they stop evolving. Years pass, but internally they remain exactly the same person. Bruce Lee never wanted that fate. He believed life itself was movement, growth, adaptation, continuous discovery. To become rigid was to become disconnected from reality. To become attached to your current identity was to limit your future potential. And that is exactly what ego does. It convinces you that who you are now is who you must remain. It convinces you that changing is weakness. It convinces you that admitting mistakes is failure. It convinces you that asking questions makes you look small. But the truth is the complete opposite. The strongest people are often the most teachable. The wisest people are often the most curious. The most powerful people are often the most humble, because they understand that growth never ends. They understand that every person they meet can teach them something. They understand that every challenge contains a lesson. They understand that every mistake is an opportunity. And most importantly, they understand that the moment they believe they have arrived, they begin falling behind. Bruce Lee's greatness did not come from believing he knew everything. It came from recognizing how much there was still to learn. While others were busy protecting their image, he was busy expanding his understanding. While others were defending old beliefs, he was exploring new possibilities. While others were trying to appear wise, he was becoming wiser. That is why ego is so expensive, because it charges a price most people do not notice until years later. The price is growth. The price is wisdom. The price is potential. The price is becoming less than you could have become. And Bruce Lee's first lesson is simple but powerful. The day you believe you have arrived is the day you stop moving forward. Stay a student. Stay curious. Stay humble. Because the moment your ego says, "I already know," life stops teaching, and your growth begins to die. Lesson 2. Ego turns every lesson into a threat instead of an opportunity. Bruce Lee understood that one of the most destructive effects of ego is that it changes the way a person sees the world. A humble mind looks at life and sees opportunities to learn, improve, and grow. An ego-driven mind looks at the same life and sees challenges to its identity, threats to its image, and attacks on its self-worth. The events may be exactly the same, but the interpretation becomes completely different. This is why two people can experience the same criticism and walk away with entirely different outcomes. One person hears criticism and immediately becomes defensive. Their mind starts searching for reasons why the other person is wrong. They focus on protecting themselves rather than understanding what is being said. They become emotionally attached to proving a point. Even if there is valuable truth hidden within the criticism, they never receive it because their ego has already built a wall around their mind. The other person hears the same criticism and pauses before reacting. They do not automatically assume they are being attacked. They do not rush to defend their reputation. Instead, they ask themselves a simple question: is there something here that can help me become better? Because they are not obsessed with protecting an image, they are free to examine the information honestly. Sometimes they will discover the criticism is inaccurate, but other times they will discover a weakness they never noticed before. In both situations, they gain something valuable because their ego is not standing in the way. Bruce Lee believed that growth requires a person to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Every lesson worth learning forces you to confront a limitation. Every improvement begins with the recognition that something can be improved. Every breakthrough starts with the admission that your current understanding is incomplete. Ego hates this process because ego wants to appear complete. It wants to appear flawless. It wants to believe that there are no weaknesses left to uncover. The problem is that reality does not care about your self-image. Reality rewards awareness, not pride. If you have a weakness, it exists whether you acknowledge it or not. If you are making mistakes, those mistakes continue affecting your life whether you admit them or not. If there is something you need to learn, refusing to learn it does not make the need disappear. It only delays your progress. Bruce Lee saw countless people become trapped by this pattern. They spent years defending the person they were instead of becoming the person they could be. Every piece of feedback felt like an insult. Every disagreement felt personal. Every challenge felt like an attack on their value. Instead of growing stronger, they became more fragile because their confidence depended on never being questioned. True confidence works differently. True confidence does not fear correction because it is not built on perfection. It is built on the willingness to improve. A genuinely confident person can admit mistakes without feeling destroyed. They can change their opinion without feeling weak. They can learn from someone younger, less experienced, or completely different from themselves because their goal is truth, not superiority. Bruce Lee often emphasized that a person must empty their cup before it can be filled again. This idea becomes especially important when discussing ego. Imagine someone carrying a cup that is already overflowing with pride, assumptions, and certainty. No matter how much wisdom life tries to pour into that cup, nothing new can enter because there is no room. The person may sit in front of great teachers, read great books, and experience powerful lessons, but they remain unchanged because they believe they already know enough. This is why ego quietly blocks learning, even when learning opportunities are everywhere. It creates the illusion of knowledge while preventing real understanding. It allows people to collect information without gaining wisdom. They become skilled at talking about growth while avoiding the very experiences that create growth. Bruce Lee wanted people to develop a different relationship with challenges. He wanted them to stop seeing correction as humiliation and start seeing it as refinement. He wanted them to stop viewing mistakes as proof of inadequacy and start viewing them as evidence that they were pushing beyond their current limits. He wanted them to understand that every weakness honestly recognized becomes a doorway to greater strength. Think about how many opportunities are lost because of ego. Relationships are damaged because someone refuses to apologize. Careers stagnate because someone refuses to accept feedback. Friendships end because someone cannot admit they were wrong. Potential remains unrealized because someone is too attached to appearing competent to become competent. In each case, the cost of ego is not immediate destruction. The cost is slower and more subtle. It is the gradual loss of growth, wisdom, connection, and possibility. Bruce Lee understood that the strongest individuals are not the ones who never make mistakes. They are the ones who learn quickly from every mistake they make. They do not waste energy defending their errors. They do not spend years protecting a false image of perfection. They remain students of life, constantly adapting, constantly refining, constantly improving. And that is why ego is such a dangerous obstacle. It convinces people that protecting their image is more important than developing their character. It persuades them to choose comfort over growth, certainty over curiosity, and pride over progress. In doing so, it turns every lesson into a threat, when it could have been an opportunity. Bruce Lee's second lesson is powerful and unforgettable. The moment your ego feels attacked, pause and ask yourself whether life is trying to teach you something, because the people who grow the fastest are not those who avoid correction, but those who are humble enough to learn from it. Every lesson that hurts your pride may be the very lesson that transforms your life. Lesson 3. Ego makes you fight battles that never needed to be fought. Bruce Lee understood something that most people spend their entire lives failing to recognize. Many of the struggles that exhaust us, frustrate us, and drain our energy are not created by the outside world. They are created by the ego's constant need to defend itself. The ego does not simply want to exist. It wants to be right. It wants to be admired. It wants to be respected. It wants to win every argument, and it wants to protect the image it has built about itself at all costs. The result is that people end up fighting battles that never needed to be fought in the first place. Look carefully at how many conflicts begin. Someone says something you do not agree with. Someone criticizes your work. Someone misunderstands your intentions. Someone fails to give you the respect you think you deserve. Someone receives recognition that you secretly wanted for yourself. In these moments, reality presents a situation, but the ego immediately transforms it into a personal challenge. Instead of asking, "What is the best response?" the ego asks, "How do I protect my pride?" And the moment pride becomes the priority, clarity disappears. Bruce Lee knew that a person controlled by ego spends an enormous amount of energy trying to prove things that do not actually matter. They want to prove they are smarter. They want to prove they are stronger. They want to prove they are right. They want to prove they deserve attention. They want to prove their value to people who may never appreciate them no matter what they do. In the process, they become trapped in endless competition, endless comparison, and endless conflict. What makes this even more dangerous is that the ego often disguises itself as strength. A person may believe they are standing up for themselves when they are actually defending their pride. They may believe they are being courageous when they are simply afraid of looking weak. They may believe they are fighting for justice when they are really fighting to protect an image. This is why Bruce Lee believed self-awareness was so important. Without awareness, it becomes almost impossible to tell the difference between genuine strength and ego-driven reaction. Bruce Lee himself faced criticism throughout his life. He faced people who doubted him, challenged him, misunderstood him, and attacked his ideas. Yet one of the reasons he became so powerful was because he did not waste all of his energy trying to convince everyone. He understood that not every opinion deserves a response. Not every challenge deserves attention. Not every disagreement deserves a battle. Sometimes the strongest action is to keep moving forward while others remain stuck arguing. The ego hates this idea because the ego feeds on conflict. It constantly seeks validation through victory. It believes that winning arguments will create peace. It believes that defeating opponents will create confidence. It believes that proving itself to others will create self-worth. But Bruce Lee saw the truth. No amount of external victory can satisfy an ego that constantly needs validation. Even after winning one battle, it immediately looks for another. This creates a cycle that never ends. One argument leads to another. One competition leads to another. One attempt to prove yourself leads to another. Years pass, and the person remains trapped in the same pattern, constantly seeking approval, constantly defending their reputation, constantly reacting to the opinions of others. They become emotionally controlled by the very people they are trying to defeat. Bruce Lee wanted freedom from that cycle. He wanted people to understand that true power is not found in dominating others. True power is found in mastering yourself. A person who cannot control their reactions can be manipulated by anyone. A person whose ego is easily triggered can be controlled by a simple insult. A person who constantly needs recognition becomes dependent on the approval of others. That is not strength. That is a hidden form of weakness. The strongest individuals are often the calmest because they no longer feel the need to prove themselves every moment. They understand their value without needing constant confirmation. They can walk away from unnecessary conflict because their identity is not dependent on winning. They can remain silent when others are desperate to argue because they know that peace is often more valuable than victory. Bruce Lee often emphasized efficiency. In martial arts, every movement should have a purpose. Every action should be necessary. Wasted motion creates weakness. The same principle applies to life. Wasted emotional energy creates weakness. Every unnecessary argument, every pointless rivalry, every battle fought only to protect pride, drains energy that could have been invested into growth, mastery, and progress. Think about how much energy people lose trying to protect their ego. They replay conversations in their minds for hours. They obsess over criticism for days. They carry resentment for years. They become consumed by what others think about them. Meanwhile, life continues moving forward, Opportunities continue passing by, and growth continues waiting for them. The ego keeps them focused on proving themselves, while the truly important work remains undone. Bruce Lee understood that freedom begins when you stop making everything about yourself. When criticism no longer destroys you, when disagreement no longer threatens you, when another person's success no longer diminishes you, when silence no longer feels like defeat. In that moment, life becomes much lighter because you are no longer carrying the endless burden of defending an image. And this leads to one of Bruce Lee's deepest insights. The person who is obsessed with winning often loses their peace, while the person who is willing to let go of unnecessary battles gains a kind of strength that cannot be shaken. They are no longer controlled by the opinions, actions, or judgments of others. Their energy belongs to them again. Bruce Lee's third lesson is this: every battle costs something, so choose your battles carefully. Do not allow your ego to drag you into conflicts that add nothing to your life. The strongest person is not the one who wins every fight, but the one who knows which fights are not worth having. Real power begins when you stop trying to prove yourself and start focusing on becoming yourself. Lesson 4. Ego blinds you to the truth about yourself. Bruce Lee believed that one of the most dangerous consequences of a large ego is not that it makes you arrogant, loud, or difficult to deal with. Those are only the symptoms. The deeper danger is that ego slowly separates you from reality. It creates a false version of yourself inside your mind, and over time you become more connected to that illusion than to the truth. This is why ego is so difficult to detect. Most weaknesses announce themselves clearly. Fear feels uncomfortable. Failure is obvious. Confusion creates uncertainty, but ego often feels good. It makes you feel important. It makes you feel special. It makes you feel superior. And because it feels good, people rarely question it. They assume that because something feels good, it must also be helping them. Bruce Lee understood that this is exactly how people become trapped. The ego starts building an image of who you think you are, an image of how intelligent you are, an image of how successful you are, an image of how much wiser you are than others, an image of how much stronger you are than the people around you. At first, this image seems harmless. It may even motivate you for a while, but slowly, something dangerous begins to happen. Instead of improving yourself, you start protecting the image of yourself, and the moment protecting the image becomes more important than improving the reality, growth begins to die. Bruce Lee knew that reality is the greatest teacher a person will ever have. Reality shows you where you are weak. Reality shows you where you are strong. Reality shows you what is working and what is not working. Reality gives honest feedback every single day, but ego hates honest feedback because honest feedback threatens the image. If someone points out a weakness, ego becomes defensive. If someone highlights a mistake, ego becomes uncomfortable. If someone succeeds where you failed, ego becomes jealous. If someone knows something you do not know, ego becomes insecure. Notice what is happening. The truth itself becomes the enemy, not because truth is harmful, but because truth threatens the false image that ego has created. Bruce Lee spent his entire life searching for truth instead of comfort. That is one of the reasons he became extraordinary. He was willing to face uncomfortable realities about himself. He was willing to admit when something was ineffective. He was willing to abandon ideas that no longer worked. He was willing to change. Most people are not. Most people would rather protect an illusion than face reality. And this is where ego becomes extremely expensive, because every time reality tries to teach you something and your ego rejects the lesson, you lose an opportunity to grow. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that shows every weakness, every blind spot, every mistake, and every area where improvement is possible. A humble person looks into that mirror and says, "Good, now I know what to work on." An ego-driven person looks into that mirror and immediately searches for reasons why the mirror must be wrong. One person grows, the other remains the same. Years later, the difference becomes enormous. Bruce Lee understood that mastery is impossible without honesty. You cannot improve a weakness you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot solve a problem you refuse to see. You cannot become stronger while pretending you are already strong enough. That is why self-deception is one of the ego's most dangerous weapons. The ego constantly tells comforting stories. It tells you that your failures are always someone else's fault. It tells you that your problems are caused by circumstances. It tells you that your lack of progress is because people do not understand you. It tells you that you would succeed if only the world treated you differently. And sometimes there may be a small amount of truth in these explanations, but Bruce Lee understood that growth begins the moment you stop asking, "Whose fault is this?" and start asking, "What can I improve?" That question changes everything, because it shifts your attention away from excuses and toward responsibility. And responsibility is where real power begins. A person who takes responsibility for their growth can improve. A person who blames everything outside themselves remains trapped. The ego always seeks comfort. Awareness always seeks truth. Bruce Lee chose truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it required change, even when it forced him to abandon ideas he once believed, because he understood that truth may hurt your pride today, but it will strengthen your life tomorrow. The ego prefers temporary comfort. Wisdom prefers long-term growth, and this creates one of the most important choices every person faces. Do you want to feel right, or do you want to become better? Most people unknowingly choose feeling right. They defend old habits. They justify bad decisions. They protect weaknesses. They cling to beliefs that no longer serve them, and as a result, they stay exactly where they are. Bruce Lee chose the opposite path. He chose improvement over pride, learning over certainty, reality over illusion, growth over comfort. That is why he continued evolving while others remained stuck. The greatest irony of ego is that it promises strength while secretly creating weakness. It promises confidence while secretly creating insecurity. It promises superiority while secretly creating fragility, because anything built on illusion eventually collapses when confronted by reality. But a person who builds themselves on truth becomes difficult to shake. They do not fear criticism because they are willing to learn. They do not fear mistakes because they are willing to improve. They do not fear failure because they understand that every failure contains information. They are not obsessed with appearing strong because they are focused on becoming strong, and that difference changes everything. Bruce Lee's fourth lesson is this: the ego creates a version of yourself that you desperately want to protect. But real growth begins when you stop protecting an image and start facing the truth. The truth may wound your pride for a moment, but it will strengthen your character for a lifetime. A person who can see themselves clearly possesses a power far greater than a person who simply believes they are powerful. Lesson 5. The bigger your ego becomes, the smaller your world gets. Bruce Lee understood a truth that sounds almost impossible at first, yet becomes undeniable once you see it clearly. The bigger a person's ego becomes, the smaller their world becomes. Most people assume the opposite. They assume ego expands a person. They assume it makes someone more powerful, more important, more influential, and more significant. But Bruce Lee saw what was happening beneath the surface. He realized that ego does not expand awareness, it narrows it. It does not create freedom, it creates limitation. It does not open doors, it quietly closes them. And the most dangerous part is that most people never notice it happening. At the beginning, ego often feels like confidence. A person achieves success, receives recognition, gains skill, or earns respect. These things are not bad in themselves. In fact, they can be the result of years of hard work and dedication. The problem begins when the mind starts building an identity around those achievements. Instead of seeing success as something they experienced, they begin seeing success as who they are. Once that happens, everything changes. Every conversation becomes about protecting status. Every disagreement becomes personal. Every challenge becomes threatening. Every criticism becomes offensive. Every mistake becomes embarrassing. Every successful person becomes competition, and every failure becomes a wound to the identity. Slowly, the world starts shrinking. Bruce Lee understood that the ego is constantly dividing reality into categories. It labels people as above you or below you. It labels situations as victories or defeats. It labels experiences as good for your image or bad for your image. Instead of experiencing life directly, you begin experiencing life through the filter of self-importance. And that filter becomes a prison. Think about how many opportunities disappear because of ego. A person refuses to ask questions because they do not want to appear uninformed. A leader refuses advice because they do not want to appear uncertain. A student stops learning because they believe they already know enough. A husband refuses to apologize because his pride feels more important than peace. A friend refuses to admit a mistake because protecting their image feels safer than repairing the relationship. In every case, the ego convinces the person they are protecting themselves, but they are actually limiting themselves. Bruce Lee understood that every time ego takes control, awareness loses ground. Instead of seeing reality, you begin seeing only what protects your identity. You hear only what confirms your beliefs. You notice only what supports your position. You become less curious, less open, less flexible, less alive, and because growth requires openness, your growth begins to slow. This is why some people seem to stop evolving even though they continue aging. Their body moves forward through time, but their mind remains trapped inside the same patterns, the same assumptions, and the same limitations. Years pass, opportunities pass, relationships pass, lessons pass, but the person remains largely unchanged, not because life failed to teach them, but because ego convinced them they no longer needed to learn. Bruce Lee never wanted that kind of life. He believed that every day should be an opportunity to discover something new, not just about the world, but about yourself. He understood that the person who remains curious remains alive. The person who remains teachable remains powerful. The person who remains humble remains capable of transformation. But ego works in the opposite direction. The more ego grows, the more curiosity dies. The more ego grows, the less willing a person becomes to explore unfamiliar ideas. The more ego grows, the more attached a person becomes to old identities, and eventually they stop growing altogether. One of the greatest hidden costs of ego is that it isolates people. At first, this isolation is emotional. The person becomes unable to connect deeply because every interaction is filtered through pride. They become more concerned with being respected than being understood, more concerned with appearing strong than being authentic, more concerned with winning than connecting. Over time, this isolation becomes visible. Relationships become strained. Friendships become shallow. Conversations become competitions, and genuine connection becomes rare. Bruce Lee understood that a person who is constantly trying to prove their value can never fully experience life, because proving requires comparison, and comparison destroys presence. The moment you start comparing yourself to everyone around you, you stop appreciating where you are. You stop appreciating what you have. You stop appreciating who you are becoming. Instead, your attention becomes trapped in an endless race. Someone will always be richer. Someone will always be stronger. Someone will always be more famous. Someone will always receive more attention. If your self-worth depends on being above others, you will spend your life chasing a finish line that keeps moving further away. Bruce Lee rejected that entire game. He was not interested in becoming better than everyone else. He was interested in becoming better than the person he was yesterday. That distinction is incredibly important. One path leads to comparison. The other leads to growth. One path creates insecurity. The other creates mastery. One path is fueled by ego. The other is fueled by awareness. Bruce Lee understood that true greatness does not come from standing above people. It comes from rising above your previous limitations. And that can only happen when the ego stops demanding superiority. The irony is that people often believe ego makes them larger than life. But in reality, Ego makes life smaller. It reduces the world to a stage where everything revolves around protecting an identity. Every experience becomes about me. Every conversation becomes about me. Every success becomes about me. Every failure becomes about me. And when life becomes centered entirely around the self, its richness disappears. The world becomes smaller because awareness becomes smaller. Bruce Lee wanted the opposite. He wanted a mind that was open enough to learn from anyone, flexible enough to adapt to anything, free enough to change at any moment, and humble enough to recognize that no matter how much knowledge you gain, there is always more to discover. That is where real power lives. Not in thinking you know everything, not in believing you are superior, not in protecting an image, but in remaining open to growth. Because the moment you believe you have become something extraordinary, you stop becoming. And the moment you stop becoming, your potential begins to fade. Bruce Lee's fifth lesson is this: the bigger your ego becomes, the smaller your world gets. Ego narrows your vision, limits your growth, weakens your relationships, and traps you inside a prison of self-importance. But humility expands your world. It keeps you curious, adaptable, teachable, and alive. The person who remains a student of life will always go further than the person who believes they have already mastered it. Lesson 6. Ego is the invisible enemy that steals the life you could have lived. Bruce Lee believed that the most dangerous enemies are not always the ones standing in front of you. The most dangerous enemies are often the ones living inside you, quietly influencing your decisions without your awareness. They do not attack openly. They do not announce their presence. They do not look threatening. Instead, they slowly shape your thinking, your actions, your relationships, and your future, until one day you realize you have become someone very different from the person you could have been. And in Bruce Lee's eyes, ego was one of those enemies. Not because ego always makes a person loud or arrogant, not because ego always creates obvious failure, but because ego quietly steals possibilities. It steals growth before growth can happen. It steals wisdom before wisdom can be gained. It steals relationships before they can deepen. It steals opportunities before they can be recognized. And perhaps most tragically, it steals the future version of yourself that might have existed if you had remained humble enough to keep evolving. This is why ego is so dangerous. Most enemies can be seen. Most obstacles can be identified. Most problems can be measured, but ego often disguises itself as something positive. It tells you that you are protecting your dignity when you are actually protecting your pride. It tells you that you are standing strong when you are actually refusing to learn. It tells you that you are defending your principles when you are really defending your identity. It tells you that you are confident when you are secretly afraid of being wrong. And because the voice sounds reasonable, people follow it for years without questioning where it is leading them. Bruce Lee understood that every human being has two paths available at any moment. The first path is the path of ego. The second path is the path of awareness. The path of ego always feels easier in the beginning. When someone criticizes you, ego tells you to reject the criticism. When someone succeeds, ego tells you to feel threatened. When you make a mistake, ego tells you to hide it. When you fail, ego tells you to blame someone else. When life exposes a weakness, ego tells you to pretend it does not exist. This path feels comfortable because it protects your image. But comfort comes at a price, and that price is growth. The path of awareness is much harder. When criticism comes, awareness asks whether there is something useful to learn. When someone succeeds, awareness becomes inspired rather than threatened. When mistakes happen, awareness studies them honestly. When failure arrives, awareness takes responsibility and searches for lessons. When weakness is exposed, awareness sees an opportunity for improvement. This path can be uncomfortable. It can challenge your pride. It can force you to face truths you would rather avoid. But unlike ego, awareness leads somewhere. It leads toward mastery. It leads toward wisdom. It leads toward freedom. Bruce Lee chose awareness again and again throughout his life. That is why he never stopped evolving. Most people reach a certain level of success and begin protecting it. Bruce Lee reached success and immediately asked what he still needed to improve. Most people become attached to what made them successful. Bruce Lee remained willing to abandon what no longer served him. Most people spend their lives trying to prove themselves. Bruce Lee spent his life trying to understand himself, and that difference changed everything. One of the greatest tragedies Bruce Lee recognized is that many people never discover their true potential because their ego gets in the way long before they reach it. Imagine a person with extraordinary talent, a person capable of tremendous growth, a person capable of creating something meaningful, a person capable of inspiring others. Now imagine that same person becoming attached to their current level of success. Instead of growing, they start protecting. Instead of learning, they start defending. Instead of evolving, they start repeating. Years pass, the talent remains, the potential remains, but the growth stops. Not because they lacked ability, not because they lacked opportunity, but because ego convinced them they no longer needed to change. This happens far more often than people realize. Entire lives become smaller because ego becomes larger. Entire futures disappear because pride becomes more important than progress. Entire relationships collapse because being right becomes more important than understanding. Entire dreams remain unrealized because protecting an identity becomes more important than becoming something greater. Bruce Lee wanted people to understand that the greatest battle is rarely external. The greatest battle is internal. It is the battle between who you are and who you could become. It is the battle between pride and growth. It is the battle between certainty and curiosity. It is the battle between defending the self and developing the self, and this battle never truly ends. Every day presents new opportunities for ego to take control. Every day presents new opportunities for awareness to lead instead. The person who wins this battle is not the person who becomes perfect. The person who wins this battle is the person who remains teachable, the person who remains curious, the person who remains open, the person who remains willing to change, because change is impossible without humility, and humility is impossible when ego sits on the throne. Bruce Lee understood that true mastery is not mastery over others. It is mastery over yourself. It is the ability to observe your reactions without being controlled by them. It is the ability to hear criticism without becoming defensive. It is the ability to face failure without losing confidence. It is the ability to succeed without becoming arrogant. It is the ability to keep learning long after others believe there is nothing left to learn. This kind of mastery is rare, not because it is complicated, but because it requires a person to let go of the one thing they often protect most fiercely: their ego. And that is why so few people achieve it. The ego wants admiration. The ego wants recognition. The ego wants superiority. The ego wants certainty. But awareness wants truth, and truth is where growth lives. Bruce Lee knew that a person who chooses truth over ego may occasionally feel uncomfortable, but they will continue evolving. A person who chooses ego over truth may occasionally feel powerful, but eventually they will stop growing. And when growth stops, potential begins to die. This is the hidden cost that Bruce Lee wanted people to see. Ego does not simply create bad decisions. Ego creates a smaller life, a narrower future, a weaker mind, a more fragile identity, and over time it quietly steals the person you could have become. Bruce Lee's sixth lesson is this: the greatest enemy you will ever face is not another person. It is the part of yourself that values pride more than growth. Every time you choose awareness over ego, learning over certainty, humility over self-importance, and truth over comfort, you move closer to your highest potential. The person you are capable of becoming is waiting on the other side of the ego you refuse to let go. Lesson 7. The day you defeat your ego is the day your real life begins. Bruce Lee understood something that very few people ever realize. Most people spend their entire lives trying to become somebody. They want more status, more recognition, more admiration, more influence, more proof that they matter. And on the surface, this pursuit seems normal. It even seems necessary. After all, the world constantly encourages people to build an image, protect a reputation, and create an identity that others will admire. But Bruce Lee saw a hidden problem. The harder a person works to become somebody, the further they often move away from discovering who they truly are. Because the ego is always concerned with appearance. It wants to know how people see you. It wants to know who is ahead of you. It wants to know who respects you. It wants to know whether you are winning. It wants to know whether you are receiving enough attention. And because of this obsession, the ego keeps a person focused outward, always looking, always comparing, always measuring, always competing, always worrying, always chasing, but rarely living. Bruce Lee believed that real freedom begins when a person stops chasing an image and starts discovering reality. Because the truth is that most people are exhausted, not because life is difficult, but because they are carrying a version of themselves that they are constantly trying to maintain. They wake up trying to protect it. They speak to protect it. They argue to protect it. They work to protect it. They even suffer to protect it. And after years of doing this, they become strangers to themselves. They know their image. They know their reputation. They know their title, but they no longer know who they are without those things. Bruce Lee never wanted to become a prisoner of an image. That is why he constantly evolved. He refused to allow success to trap him. He refused to allow fame to define him. He refused to allow yesterday's accomplishments to control tomorrow's possibilities. He understood that life is movement, and anything that stops moving begins to die. This includes the human spirit. The ego always wants certainty, but growth requires uncertainty. The ego wants safety, but transformation requires risk. The ego wants comfort, but greatness is born through discomfort. And this creates the greatest internal battle every human being faces. A battle between the self that wants to remain comfortable and the self that wants to become better. Most people choose comfort. They stay where they are. They repeat the same habits, think the same thoughts, make the same excuses, protect the same limitations, and years later they wonder why nothing changed. Bruce Lee chose a different path. He chose growth. Again and again, even when growth was uncomfortable, even when growth required him to abandon old beliefs, even when growth forced him to admit he was wrong, even when growth demanded humility, because he understood a powerful truth. Every new level of life requires the death of an old version of yourself. The ego hates this. The ego wants permanence. It wants to hold on to who you were yesterday. It wants to keep familiar identities alive forever. But life does not work that way. The person you were 5 years ago cannot take you where you want to go today. The mindset that created yesterday's problems cannot create tomorrow's solutions. The beliefs that once protected you may eventually limit you, and if you refuse to let them go, you remain stuck. Bruce Lee understood that letting go is not weakness. Letting go is growth. Letting go is evolution. Letting go is the doorway to freedom. Many people spend years trying to conquer the world while never conquering themselves. They chase external victories while losing the internal battle. They collect achievements but never find peace. They gain recognition but never find fulfillment. They become successful but remain insecure because ego can never be satisfied. Give it praise and it wants more. Give it success and it wants more. Give it attention and it wants more. There is no finish line, no final victory, no permanent satisfaction. The ego is a hunger that grows stronger the more it is fed. Bruce Lee saw this clearly. That is why he turned inward, not to escape life, but to understand it. He realized that true power comes from self-mastery, not mastery over other people, not dominance, not control, not status, but mastery over your own mind, your own reactions, your own fears, your own desires, your own ego, because the person who masters themselves cannot be easily manipulated. They are not controlled by praise. They are not destroyed by criticism. They are not shaken by comparison. They are not trapped by the opinions of others. Their strength comes from within, and that strength is far more powerful than anything the outside world can give. This is why Bruce Lee's greatest lesson was never really about fighting. It was about freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from limitation. Freedom from false identity. Freedom from the endless need to prove yourself. And when that freedom arrives, something extraordinary happens. Life becomes lighter, your mind becomes clearer, your relationships become healthier, your decisions become wiser, your growth becomes faster, and for the first time you stop living for an image and start living from awareness. That is the moment your real life begins. Not when the world finally recognizes you, not when everyone finally approves of you, not when you become famous, not when you become powerful, but when you become free from the ego that has been controlling you all along. Bruce Lee's final lesson is this: the greatest victory is not over another person. The greatest victory is over the ego that keeps you small while convincing you that you are big. The day you stop trying to prove yourself to the world is the day you begin discovering your true power. And the day you defeat your ego is the day your real life finally begins. And perhaps now you understand why Bruce Lee considered ego one of the most dangerous obstacles a person can face. Not because it destroys you overnight, not because it announces itself loudly, but because it works silently. It slowly convinces you that you already know enough. It convinces you that you have nothing left to learn. It convinces you that protecting your image is more important than improving your character. And before you realize it, years have passed, opportunities have passed, lessons have passed, growth has passed. Not because life stopped teaching you, but because ego stopped you from listening. Bruce Lee spent his life trying to become freer, freer from limitations, freer from fear, freer from rigid thinking, freer from false identities, and most importantly, freer from the ego that prevents people from reaching their true potential. Because the truth is, your greatest enemy has never been another person. It has never been your critics. It has never been your competition. It has never been the people who doubted you. Your greatest enemy has always been the version of yourself that values pride more than growth. The version of yourself that would rather be right than become better. The version of yourself that wants comfort instead of transformation. The version of yourself that keeps holding on when life is asking you to let go. Bruce Lee understood that real strength begins with humility. Real wisdom begins with curiosity. Real confidence begins with self-awareness. And real freedom begins when you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone. Because a lion does not spend its life convincing others that it is powerful. A mountain does not argue about its height. And a truly strong person does not constantly seek validation. They simply continue growing. They continue learning. They continue evolving. Quietly, patiently, relentlessly. So as this video comes to an end, ask yourself one question. What part of your ego is holding your life back right now? Is it your need to be right? Your fear of being wrong? Your inability to accept criticism? Your attachment to an old identity? Your refusal to let go of the past? Whatever it is, recognize it. Face it honestly, because the moment you become aware of it, you take away its power. And remember this: the strongest people in the world are not those who conquer others. They are those who conquer themselves. The wisest people are not those who know everything. They are those who never stop learning. And the most powerful people are not those with the biggest ego. They are those who have learnt to live without being controlled by it. Bruce Lee's message was never about becoming greater than everyone else. It was about becoming greater than the person you were yesterday. One lesson, one challenge, one act of humility at a time. Thank you for watching. If this lesson spoke to you, Let me know in the comments, what was the biggest insight you learned from Bruce Lee's warning about ego? And if you're committed to mastering your mind, growing beyond your limitations, and living with the discipline and awareness Bruce Lee taught, make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey. Until next time, stay humble, stay aware, keep learning, and never let your ego become bigger than your potential.